Hello, everyone. I am Melissa Forziat. I'm a keynote speaker and the host of this Halt and Catch Fire rewatch podcast. Now, when I speak, my topic is something that I call Take the Doughnut, which for me is another way to say carpe diem, go after the things that you want in life. Something that I wanted to do this year was rewatch the show Halt and Catch Fire, but this time talk about it with other people. And it's been a blast because I've been able to start talking with all different kinds of people about this show. Now, for those who are kind of new to the coverage, this is a special interview. So here's what I've been doing so far. I've been doing episode recaps that are spoiler free for those who are just getting into the show. I've been doing interviews with cast and crew that are spoiler filled if you are not new to the show and want to get more insight into what's been happening. And now I'm really excited to branch out and start doing what I'm calling special interviews with people who are sort of in the world of Halt and Catch Fire, weren't necessarily on the cast or crew, but have a lot to say about this show. And we're going to try to keep this as spoiler free as we possibly can for you, so that, it's a fun way to get to know the show and just to hear the perspectives of different people who enjoy the show from around the world. So today, I am very excited to talk with Les Weiler, who is co-host of the TV Dudes podcast and a screenwriter based in Austin, Texas. But I also have to say that I met Les at the ATX Festival, where we were both covering that event. I believe, Les, you got an interview with the Christophers and
Yep,
Toby. Is that right?
yep. The Chris's. I actually wasn't supposed to have the interview with Toby, but all day that day, well, all weekend, we saw him just pranking other shows. He gave the Hotel Cocaine guys grief and messed her. So anyway, I wasn't terribly shocked when Toby just kind of crashed my interview. Like he walked up and like, "Did you also want to talk to me?" "Yes, sir, I do."
Like, that's a hard yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, the Chris's and Toby were great. That's a very spoiler-filled interview. Yes.
Yeah. Well, welcome. I'm so glad to be talking with you today.
I'm so glad to be here. I was thrilled when you asked me, but I'm just a giant fan of this show. I forget sometimes that I've been lucky enough to talk to some folks involved with making the show because I every time I'm pressed at one of those things, I just feel like I talked my way in as the biggest nerd, and they're gonna figure it out. I'm not pressed.
Yeah.
Because yeah, I grew up in the Dallas area and Halt and Catch Fire. I'm a sucker for alt timeline stuff anyway. Uh, Earth to the Moon, not Earth to the Moon. But anytime any show kind of takes a historical stance, but then tweaks it usually for the betterment of the story. Um, I always love those, and so *Halt and Catch Fire* was a huge yes, must sit down and watch that show.
I was going to ask you what your journey was with this show, because obviously you grew up in Texas, right? So
hmm
how did you come to this show to begin with? What appealed to you about it?
I, I honestly, I think I was just flipping around for things to watch. I can't remember what year the last season actually aired. Uh,
2017.
2017. Okay, so I was caught up by then and watching week to week. So I watched the final season in real time, but prior to that, um, I think I just kind of found it somewhere the year prior, 2016, 2017, and watched all of it to catch up, basically. Um, yeah, I honestly don't know. We probably added a free trial of AMC or something like that, and yeah, next thing I know, I'm watching this.
That's a good time to find a show, like especially a show where you later find out that they were sort of not sure if they were going to be canceled from one season to the
Right.
next, and then you just sort of get to
From my
binge the whole thing
perspective,
and finish it
yeah.
off.
From my perspective, it looks so sure-handed. Like there was, because I didn't know that it was ever on a bubble. I know I watch enough TV. You got to assume. I don't know. I have that weird sense that oh, I'm really loving this. Oh God, this is doomed. Like this is my favorite show. There's no way this has another season. But they'd already kind of rolled along.
Yeah, it's so
I
true.
I was really struck. I watched the first season just because I mean I grew up about an hour from Dallas. It's not like Paris, Texas is Dallas by any stretch, uh, but Dallas was our nearby city that we'd go do Christmas shopping in, and it had the mall and stuff. Uh, and I was struck immediately when I watched this show by the brownness of the '80s in this show. I I I mean I love me a Netflix period set thing, but so often they act like we were all just dressed like Rubik's cubes or something, or like everything's a Lisa Frank stationary. And I love it. That stuff was there. I'm not saying it wasn't, but everybody's houses were brown glass and wood panel, and like it was not that exciting of an 80s. And Halt and Catch Fire just immediately was like oh my god, this is perfect. It looks perfect. I had a my first computer was a TRS 80 color computer 2 from Radio Shack. Um, in today's money, it would have cost my dad about 600 bucks. So it's like a cheap smartphone. Uh, and like watching this show was just an immediate like brought back that not just nostalgia, but that feeling of what the world felt like, what the change in the world that was coming felt like. I mean, now everything moves so fast and tech changes from year to year, and you see new stuff that you're like, holy crap, computers can do that. But the start of the 80s was like literally just, everything had looked basically the same. Like, oh my gosh, there's transistors. Like, we've got a Walkman. Um, and there was a different energy to this. Like, so you're saying that the calculator can do what kind of kind of excitement? And this show really got that without being too saccharine about like tech is going to save us. You know, like it was cool watching these characters at that exact inflection point of where the show was. And so season one just caught me with that of like, oh my gosh, it looks like the real 70s, 80s, and and then also particularly Northeast Texas, and then
Yeah.
also that where really John Bosworth as a character, like that tension between the new thing and the old guard.
Yeah, it's a really good point actually, because yeah, I like the comparison of like it's not all Lisa Frank. It's true. I think I remember growing up in the 80s, and we had like, as much as we were starting to get things that were a little bit more of the time period, I remember like I spent a lot of time in the basement of my parents' house, and we would like playing there, and we had this like
Right.
mustard yellow couch that they just never got rid of. They might still
Right.
have it now. It was just like that. There was still like people still had stuff from the prior decade,
Yeah,
and
because
that
it's
was
not like
just
your
part of
parents
it.
went out and bought everything new that year. I mean,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a really good point. It feels very lived in. It feels very like this is some of the real stuff that you would have seen
Hmm.
in that time period. So, you know, what aspect of this show, as you went along past season one, was of most interest to you personally?
It's not exactly an anthology, but it does these jumps between each season is almost an alt take on a different facet of the tech revolution. So if the first season is about, you know, literally building the better hardware, like can we build the Apple II? Like, can we make the Macintosh? And that's it's not what they make. Apple's real in their world, and they, things happen, but still you get to see this not real player, but it feels like if you didn't, I mean, if I didn't grow up and know who the players were in the real computer companies were in those years, you would assume this is real. It doesn't seem out of place. If you told me Texas Instruments had a failed Mac clone or something, I'd be like, yeah, no, is that what they took that from? Um, and so when they moved to season two, I didn't know. You just assume it's a show. They're just gonna maybe they time jump a little, but they're just gonna basically roll forward. But then like season two and three and four kind of end up being, well, let's look at gaming. Well, let's look at connectivity. Well, let's uh, the social media aspect of it, which is not a word in their show yet. Uh, and so each season kind of it made it feel like an anthology, and they kept the quality up each time. Like each season, after I knew kind of what the game was when we're rolling into season four, and I was like, well, what's it going to be now?
Yeah.
But with a trust that they've changed it each time and grabbed me again. Because I really am not a gamer. I don't play games or online games or video games much. And and so I was a little surprised that season, that the Mutiny season grabbed me. But the show manages to do what it does best, like four times in a row, in different kind of at different angles. Uh, and to me, the net effect is to kind of reveal one of the best character dramas. By changing things up, you start to see what's consistent. And these character arcs across all four of them, I think, made the show really special. It
Yeah.
makes me just want to grab people and like sit down and watch the show.
It's beautifully said. This show does time jumps really, really well. I think many of us who've watched some amount of TV have seen time jumps done badly.
Hmm.
And this show, it feels very assertive in wanting to burn through story and saying, no, we've told this story and we're moving on, but still keeping the through line all the way
Yeah,
at the same time. And that's the character development, like you were
right.
saying.
I don't feel like it uses. Often I see time jumps used to walk back a possible character tension between two characters or whatever that you just don't want to deal with. And like, you know what? We shouldn't have said that at the end of last season. They aren't in a fight anymore, and or something like that. And this show doesn't do that. It time jumps forward to put them in a different plot predicament, maybe, or different. We're not waiting 6 months on a business contract to change their lives or whatever. But the character arcs remain smooth. Um, and I think, well, I know, uh, I'm sure we're gonna end up talking about some of the main characters, but uh, it so impressed me how they react to. They feel like the same characters. They feel like the same people on a real journey, even though, as I said, the show really does feel like almost like an anthology to me. Like like if you could pitch an entirely separate. We're going to do a show about the early birth of online gaming, and that would not be Halt and Catch Fire. And then pitch a whole different show of like we're going to do a show about going head to head with Apple building building the box, and like that could be a whole separate show. And instead, these feel of a piece.
Hmm. Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit more about your experience chatting with the Christophers and Toby at the ATX festival.
Well, so I got to talk to them, I think, right after the actual panel when we got to see them all talk and everything. Um, and so they were still just buzzy off of that, and would, oh my gosh, that was such a love fest. Um, I mean, everybody on stage at a reunion is at least friendly enough to be on stage together at a reunion, right? And so it's not like at ATX Fest we saw anybody be, acrimonious at towards each other or anything on any show. But wow, they love each other. Like that whole crew was so like they hung together the whole weekend. Like you just see them in a gang, like at Toby's uh, thing about his painting later, and like I ended up seeing one of Toby Huss's. He talked about his painting career on Sunday, and like look down in the whole row next to me is like the casting director, Carrie Bishi, like just everybody down the road. Not
Carrie
Anna,
Bechet and Annabeth
yeah,
Gish were both there. Yeah.
yeah, and just like helping Toby out and just there like
And Carrie, I think,
supportive.
even heckled him with a funny question at one
Yes,
point.
yes,
They were all in like hats, but just right there with everybody
yeah,
else.
it was great. And so when I got to sit down with the Christophers, I did not know until that reunion thing that this was their first show. That's a rare, odd uh, thing to have happened. I mean, you think Vince Gilligan came out of nowhere, but he didn't. He came out of the X Files for years. And I'm not saying that the Christophers, you know, cut in line or anything, but like their first pitch found the right home, and that's just an amazing stars aligned moment. And you could see that they knew it, and they were so just kind and grateful and so happy with that they got the opportunity to do this show, and they both seemed just so happy with how it turned out. And uh, and then to hear uh, Toby Huss, who's been in, I mean, everything. If you don't think you know that actor, I promise you do. He's in everything, and he's always great. Um, and to see him talk about like the cast going over to whatever house they'd rented for Lee Pace every week, and with the scripts, and doing, opening a couple of bottles of wine, and they'd do a big table read through, and they'd all the cast going back and forth of like, I show me how you thinking you're going to play that. Nah, you could go bigger. Like really working it so that when and the Christopher's just sitting there listening to him tell that, going, we didn't even know y'all were doing that sometimes. Like that's like you could just see them like so honored that everybody took it so seriously when they felt so green. Uh, and yeah, that was just got to talk to people all weekend at various shows and everything, but they had a really wonderful energy in terms of what the show meant to them. They've both done more work since, obviously, but you could tell this is always going to have this special place in their heart, and that was so cool.
Yeah, and I don't have a sense that things landed quite as easily and smoothly for later projects as they've
Right,
gone on. So I think even, to be 10 years removed from the first season and to have that perspective, I think they come
right,
back to a festival like that to talk about this show, knowing, what an opportunity that had actually been. And I think they knew it at
right.
the time too.
But you know it differently 10 years on.
Yeah,
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 yeah.
absolutely.
Because
Oh,
I'm
that's
I'm
beautiful to
sure I'm
hear.
sure they thought that second or third project would just go well, I mean, Halt and Catch Fire went flawlessly. Uh, and yeah, so
And you
10 years
figure
on,
you've got
they
the
felt
reputation from that
right.
first project and the network from that first project, but
Yeah,
it doesn't always line up in that way.
yeah. I was thrilled to find out that what I felt coming from the screen, you always had that theory that like, oh, these people must really like each other. No, they do. They really seem to. At least the principal cast all seemed to have this really special memory of it. I know from just interviewing actors that real rehearsal time is rare in television and film. If you're doing stage theater, obviously you're going to have plenty of time to get off book and figure this out and be on all that. But television and film are frequently no rehearsal time, uh, shot out of chronology, out of chronological order. So you're going to do this scene, and I hope you remember that you need to be angrier than the scene later. Uh, and that usually you just parachute in and do your part and you're out. And that this was really special for even the breathing room to have a once a week dinner and discuss scripts. That's not normal for most projects, and it's not like they cut out a ton of the budget and did all this extra stuff for this show. It just everybody involved seemed to value it,
Mhm.
and so they did it. And I think it made a difference.
Yeah, I mean, my sense of it is from something Carrie Bichet had said was that the actors were meeting up to do those rehearsals on their own time.
That's
Um,
amazing.
yeah, that it was just like, no, we really want to do this, and so we're going to carve out some of our off time to work on the show. It's just incredible
Yeah,
to see. I know we're kind of itching to talk about the characters themselves. So, for those who are new to the show, so we're starting to set this up for you, but the show follows, we're going to say like five main characters
mhm,
as they're coming up with all of these ideas for cutting edge technology. It goes from 1983 to 1994. It starts with personal computers, and Les has already walked you through some of the other things that we look at as the seasons go on. But if we start to get oriented to those five different characters, first of all, tell me how you would describe each character, and we'll keep it, a short, let's say, bullet point response so that you
yeah.
don't feel inclined to like go into spoiler territory with it. But how would you describe, let's say, Joe McMillan, who's ultimately the visionary of the group, played by Lee Pace?
If you took the biggest jock in your high school and made him imposter syndrome personified, like he's so thin-skinned in the first season, he's so confident, but so even when he's dead right and a visionary, he feels like he's full of shit somewhere deep down that makes him dangerous and angry. And he's such a shell of a guy at the start of the series, but he's also it's his puffery that makes it work. Uh, but it made I don't know he felt like an eggshell of a character in that first season, and it's watching Lee Pace play Joe. Uh, he feels dangerous and fragile and confident all at the same time. It's an amazing. It feels like a conflicting set of character traits. And as soon as you see him, you're like, if you've worked in sales at all, there's an immediate like, oh God, I know that guy. Like when you meet his dad later, it's a very like,
Yeah, it's unsettling.
yeah.
It's
So I
beautifully
think
said.
that imposter syndrome sales guy is just what Joe starts out as for me.
Yeah, it's so good. And one thing worth noting is like all of these characters, where they start isn't necessarily where they end up, but
No,
his trajectory in this show, like I would say enigmatic is something, because it's like, oh, like is it, how much of him is confident, how much of him is imposter syndrome, like how much of it, it's like you're constantly
hmm
looking at him trying to figure out what the makeup is. It's just
and he
amazing.
yeah he reinvents himself a few times, and you're always like, is it? Hey, it felt so real, and yet larger than life. Yeah, I I don't like Joe necessarily, but I love Joe.
I have the same, yeah. I had a Joe-esque figure in my world when I first started the show. I was like, I don't know if I can watch this man. But then, by the end of the series, I feel a lot of empathy. Like
Yeah,
I really want to watch him. So I think between the writing and the performing of it, like it's just an amazing feat to get
yeah.
to. So let's talk about Cameron Howe, played by Mackenzie Davis. She's a young, talented woman in programming. How would you describe her?
So this was the show that introduced me to Mackenzie Davis. I don't know that I'd seen her in much prior, and it was an immediate who is that actor and where can I watch them and everything. Like, so happy to watch her career rise. She's just so good on this. But if Joe has imposter, if Joe is just walking imposter syndrome of just talking a big game, but you can't really press him on it sometimes. Uh, Cameron is legit and has everything to prove. Uh, like she is the genius of geniuses. When we first meet her, she's clearly the smartest person walking into almost every room she's in. Uh, but young enough to have no respect. And we're not all geniuses. I'm not a genius at computers in any stretch. But everybody's got a zone of genius in something. Everybody's got something that they're good at, and everybody's been young before. I'm not young now, but I have been young. Uh, and at some point, you've been in a room where you knew what you were talking about, and it didn't matter. And that when you meet Cam at the start, and she's just ready to give a middle finger to school, and she knows more than these people, and there's no way she's going to accept a suit and tie entry job at any of these. Like, she knows enough to take this industry over, but there's no place for her to actually get a job in this industry except destroy it and make a new industry. And that's just she's just on fire at the start of the show. Like, whether it's going to self-immolate or become something, who knows? But she's just, and yet still character trait-wise, a fragile person. I think when we at the very start of the show, she has what is debatably a bad idea hookup, and it shows that, like, okay, for all your competency in one area, there are other areas that you know nothing about, and like she cannot business negotiate or manage some social situations or things like that, but sit her down in front of programming and there's nobody better. And
Yeah.
I like watching, especially as we get into the game seasons later, and you watch her get better at game design while simultaneously not being great at managing real people, and you kind of have to wait for this to sort of combine of like, I know you understand puzzles and challenges and theories and stuff, you're not applying it to the people you know. And it's wonderful watching Cam get better at certain things that she's terrible at. But
Yeah.
at the start of it, she's so smart and so on fire. And you see Joe just immediately recognize that that is someone else's fire that I could use.
Yeah. And you were starting to touch upon this in that answer, but one of the things that I find very interesting for me in watching her character is this question of what are you capable of doing and what should you be doing?
Yes.
Like just like you're this is something that seems like the next step. And is that the right step for you? And I think
Mm-hmm.
to be able to really kind of own that and look at that and examine that. And we don't always have the luxury of being able to do that. But I think this show gives us a really cool depiction of like these areas where she's stretching herself should like are those things that are all meant to take
Mm-hmm.
or does if she's got a zone of genius should she live in that zone of genius. It's like this really interesting constant testing her skills that
Yeah.
this show gives her. So, and Mackenzie Davis's face, just she can communicate so much with a look.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my
Oh yeah.
goodness. So let's talk about Gordon Clark, who is played by Scoot McNairy. He's a skilled engineer of the group. How would you describe Gordon?
I when Gordon feels like the the other side of the coin for Joe for much of the, at least the early part. Everybody kind of goes their separate ways and comes back and goes as the show goes on. But in the start, they feel like the two, I don't know, poles of the magnet or poles of the battery that find each other that make this power. Uh, and I love Gordon's kind of precipice of bitterness that he's at the start. He is incredibly smart. He should be leading this company's engineering team and doing all this smart stuff. And he has this idea for architecture on chips that's going to change the world, and has taken enough losses and been, I don't know, just shut down enough in his lifetime that at the start of the show you can kind of see where this could really turn into just a bitter guy uh, who just sits in the back of the meetings and goes, well, I know how to do it better than that, but doesn't add, but doesn't contribute, you know. And to me, it gives a perfect spot for him to need what Joe's selling, which is just that raw confidence, because that's really all Joe's got. Uh, he needs somebody to come along and go, that idea that you just said, that's genius, and we're running with it. I don't care if you don't want to. And Joe brings energy to it, and uh, Gordon, and in a different way, Cam, bring the actual goods. Like Joe's out there selling a car that doesn't exist, basically, and like these two are the car. Uh, and yet Gordon doesn't feel like a redundant character to, or and Cam doesn't feel like a redundant character to Gordon. Uh, Even though I do feel like they're the legit brain power behind this company in every scene, no matter what they're doing, whether Gordon's with them or not. Like they're the two smarties in the show at the start who can actually do it, what they're saying, and then Joe's just pitching vaporware for most of the show and hoping these guys can hustle it. Uh, but they're so, Cameron and Gordon are so personality wise different. She's just wildness and like, well, I don't care what came before. It's probably, if it came before, it's probably stupid. Break it. And Gordon feels more like, no, there's respect for the things that came before were genius, and we're going to improve them or do it, but not burn it all down and start over. Kind of, he's not a revolutionary in the same way.
Yeah, and he's a bit older than Cam too. So I
Hmm.
think like sometimes you wonder like how much was he like Cam at one point, and then
Right.
maybe he was part of a development of some of those earlier things, so that maybe you don't want to burn it down quite as much,
Right.
but you just are angry about it.
Right.
It's like
If you
this
put
really
Cam in a
interesting thing.
cubicle for 10 years, does she end up like Gordon?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fun thought exercise, and then it's something you get to see like how these characters develop over time as well.
Hmm.
So if we talk about Gordon Clark, we've got to talk about Donna Clark, right? So Carrie Bechet played Donna. She's a hardware expert, project manager, jack of many trades, Jill of many trades.
Hmm.
So how would you describe Donna?
Donna's my favorite character in the show, by I think by a country mile. Her arc is the best thing they do writing wise for me, um, and I think so. I don't want to get into that because it'll spoil some stuff. But at the start of the show, we see Donna. If you blurred your eyes and you didn't pay close attention, you would think that Donna was a absolutely normal late 70s, early 80s housewife because she's got the kids and she's answering the phone and she's talking to Gordon while he drinks a beer. He's working on the computers, but she's, and then occasionally these flashes come out where she answers a question and you realize she knows all the shit Gordon knows. Like she knows everything. Like she absolutely should be at an, maybe not the same job Gordon's doing, but an equal tier job. Her skill set might not be exactly the same, but she's as good at it. And and we get to see that a few times. And then it's about the time that me as an audience member is like, well, this can't hold. Like Donna can't just go home and like, well, I hope you kids are geniuses today. Sure wish I could be a genius. I'm a genius. Like that's just not gonna hold. And the show realizes it and puts Donna through this arc of learning to speak up through knowing Cam, through watching Gordon and Joe get frustrated back and forth, just through watching it all, she realizes how much she has to contribute, um, how much at a certain point her skill set is the gaps in theirs, uh, and then a truly remarkable character growth of realizing that um, just having a place where you're needed is not necessarily enough. That she has the skill set, she has the smarts and the mom style management skill set that fills in for all these visionary geniuses, and that is some classic bullshit, uh, patriarchal, like, well, why don't we just make Donna do the, like, why are you making coffee? Is it because you're the woman in the meeting? Like, and that really starts to come through, so that we get to watch Donna go from not feeling valued to feeling valued, and then from feeling valued to asking herself what she values. And it is a stunning arc across 4 seasons in a show full of good characters. Like, uh, but yeah, watching Donna, she doesn't, it's never really break out of this role, but realize that she's taken on a lot of jobs out of niceness or love or whatever. And there's only so many times that you can back burner yourself before it's going to start to bubble up.
Yeah. I think if you were to try to chart out the development of every character, if you actually like had some sort of graphing paper and you were
Hmm.
like drawing lines when they're like on the rise or falling or whatever, Donna's looks very different than the rest of the characters.
I agree.
It's really an interesting thing to see in tandem with the other characters.
I, I mean this in the best possible way, but Donna's a character that I am prouder of, like I'm proud of and impressed by at the end of the show. But I think I actually want to go have like a beer with her less. Like Hangout Donna was an unhappier person probably, but there was a, like, I watch her become a badass, but not necessarily someone I'd be friends with.
Mm-hmm.
Where at the
Interesting.
start I probably would have like it was a remarkable change where I was like, no, I'm not, she's not as cuddly at the end, and I don't like, oh, she's my, like, I love Bosworth so much. Uh like you want to hang out with Boz the whole time. Uh and yet I'm thrilled for her, like she was a friend of mine. Like, like if you know, the end of Goodwill Hunting or something, like if you just go to, pick Donna up for the construction job and she's just not there. Like, that's, I'm thrilled for Donna. Also, like, stop hanging out with us. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't be a mutiny. You should be running shit.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, yeah,
What a fun parallel
yeah,
between Halt and Catch Fire and Good Will Hunting. Oh my gosh,
yeah.
this is great. Yeah.
But yeah, more than any character on the show, I think Donna is my favorite arc. And I think you're right. It would look completely different if you somehow, you know, graphed it out. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we have to talk about the guy that you obviously want to talk about so much. So, John Bosworth, Boz, played by Toby Huss. Let's say he's a salesman. Uh, how would you describe Boz?
He's our old school salesman. He's the old guard. He's the thing they're blowing up. And I mean, they blow him up. Uh, I don't want to get into spoilers what all happens to Boz, but uh, he doesn't catch all the wins with the group. He goes through his own journey, and stays tied to these, rebellious hoodlums, but and stays in the show. But he's definitely the old guard. Uh, he's that old swagger, uh, sales guy, give you shit, play golf, you know, uh, just good old. He looks like so many, like, uncles and grandparents. Like, he looks like so many people I knew as a kid. Uh, like you could just smell the stale cigarettes in Boss's car. Uh, and yet he's the only one out of that season one that true old guard, like the guys that are basically selling calculators and don't see computers coming somehow, uh, or they're selling punch cards and they don't see anything else coming. Boz is the one that stays, uh, partly because the revolution doesn't leave him a lot of choice. What they do company wise doesn't leave him a lot of choice, but he's a remarkable character because he's always old school, but with with that willingness to, I don't know, keep an open mind about stuff or roll with it. I uh I've had several friends or mentors in my life, my dad, various uh, family friends who were of an older generation and wanted to be an ally on any number of issues, and were going to back you up in probably the dumbest phrased way possible, or like one of those like, man, I know you're on my side, but stop helping me. Uh, like they're going to use the wrong term, they're going to use the wrong phrase, they're absolutely their heart's in the right place, but my God, man. Uh, and that kind of was Boz of like he was going to back these kids. Like, you know what, you crazy kids, I recognize something like game recognized game a little bit, but at the same time, he never pretends to understand what the fuck they're doing. Like at any point, like he's always just like, yeah, 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 your computer stuff. So tell it to me in terms I get. How many chickens do we have here? And like Boz just kind of always brings the whole show back to the gut real emotional what's happening in this meeting, really. Uh, and as such, I think he acts as an anchor when everybody else at various points falls head over heels in love with whatever technology they're into this season and how it's going to change the world. Boz is usually the one going, okay, 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 calm down.
This is
What are we
really well
really talking about?
described because he is quite the storyteller. So sometimes he seems really big. But when you talk about him as being an anchor, that feels very true as well. So I think, um, he does keep the other characters grounded, even though he's often like this big gesturing, like big storytelling guy. Um, he somehow keeps it at a grounded level for everybody.
Yeah, he's going to tell it in the biggest cowboy story you've ever heard, but it's going to be in the service of brass tacks, you know, cutting through the bullshit. Uh, but at the same time, it is going to sound like Toby Huss telling an insane story. Uh, yeah, watching him, especially in the later seasons, as they're in some meetings that have some real price tags, and you get reminded that Boz has been in sales meetings and negotiating contracts for a long time before, maybe not contracts for telecommunications or whatever we're talking about right now. That's brand new. But at some point, you can change the rules of the card game, but you're still playing. It's still poker against another person, uh, and Boz knows that game. And
Mhm.
it's cool to watch all the other characters are, their arcs are really about knowing everything about their day job, or inventing what they need to know about their day job, but not knowing anything about dealing with personal relationships. And Boz feels like he gets personal relationships, but doesn't understand any of the tech. Uh, Even though Boz also, I mean, he's a guy in the generation he is in this show. He's not super close with his family and shit. Uh, but at the same time, I always feel like Boz is the one that's like, okay, all right, but what are y'all really mad about?
Yeah. You've said along the way sort of which characters you sort of enjoyed watching the most, or which ones their arc drew
Hmm.
you to them the most. Which character did you most connect with?
Probably, uh, probably Joe. Honestly, in terms of feeling like knowing that feeling of imposter syndrome, and whether you can do what you have an idea that you know is solid, and not just watching him bluff, and knowing that, like, man, he's right, he's actually got the cards, but he can't, he still feels like he's bluffing. And I yeah, I mean, years of therapy, I would love to pick a different character than that to have connected with. But yeah, watching the start of the show, there was an immediate like, I don't like you, but I get you. Like, you make sense in a way
Okay.
that, like, in like, dude, I hope you grow, because otherwise you're just going to keep setting fire to shit. Sometimes literally.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a tough question to answer again. The amount of mental gymnastics I know you're having to go through to answer these questions and not be all spoiler filled is just astonishing to watch. But I'm gonna even throw you another curveball here. So this show has so many good supporting cast members that come in at various points. Who was your favorite? Somebody that jumps out to you?
I mean, the first one that that jumps out was and I'm blanking on her character name now. Annabeth Gish's
Diane.
Diane.
Mhm.
But honestly, Diane becomes so big in the season that she's in that it's hard. I know she's supporting, but she's such a huge influence. She's such a huge part of why I like Donna's arc, and yeah, just wonderful. But I think my actual favorite guest star, and the casting bench on this show is crazy deep. The Gene Smart's on it for a second. Like there's tons of people in this show. Um, but Matthew Lillard shows up as I think Diebold. I think it's when they go to
Ken,
California.
yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and we've seen Boss, we've seen the new guys, the new kind of sales guys in the game computer industry and stuff, and then we get this guy who's kind of in between. He kind of knows what's up with the new tech, or is excited by it, and he kind of but kind of old school. Lillard just brought a different energy and yet somehow fit the show. And I'm of the generation that you put Matthew Lillard in something, it was a big risk of like, is he going to be any kind of character on the show, or is the whole time am I just going to go Matthew Lillard? Like he, he's Matthew Lillard for God's sake. Um, and instead the net effect I think is what we were probably all having around that time with that guy's career of going, oh man, I missed you.
Yeah.
Wow, you're really good in this. Because he's great, and I cannot express enough how much we mocked that guy in early college, like wing commander years. He We were not gentle. We were all pretty hard on, or at least my friend group, we were all pretty hard on Matthew Lillard's acting abilities. And now it's like reappraising Keanu. Like I love that guy now. Like I go back and watch him be in '90s movies, and I'm like, man, Lillard's lovable every damn time. So yeah, I when I first saw him pop on the show, I was like, I don't know if this is gonna work. And then he's a great foil for Joe. I think Joe's in his bearded economics teacher years. Like yeah, he's in his Steve Jobs coming back from the wilderness time in the show at that point. And Diebold's just a really great partner slash foil for him. Uh, yeah, and I was just surprised by the casting and how well it worked. I think that's why you have to trust really good casting directors. Sherry Thomas is amazing. Uh, she cast Breaking Bad and all sorts of stuff.
It's a really interesting casting choice for that role. Because he's often very big in the stuff that I remember him from, and he's still Matthew Lillard in this, but
Hmm.
he's absolutely found the right way to harness that.
Yeah,
Like,
his affability and friendliness
yep,
uh, almost acts as a sucker punch to the toughness of the character, and it's
yeah.
great. Yeah,
And it ends up being on a deep dive of that character. I found myself really like, what am I looking at here? There were a lot more layers to that character than you might think on paper, but it's because of what Matthew Lillard brought to it. So yeah, that's a fun choice. Um, if you could acknowledge one department of this show other than the cast,
yeah. I mean,
what would
we've
it
already talked
be?
casting. I know they're not one. They're a department. They're not really one job, but the combination of location scouting, set deck, and costuming for this show, all of the period stuff that I talked about up top, um, all of that is this combo agreement between those departments to find the right how. I don't know how they found all these locations. That they're great. The offices are period perfect. The costumes, the just everything about it adds up in a way that doesn't jump out and slap you with like here's 8 million needle drops and a bunch of socks with three stripes on them. Don't you know you're in the 80s? Like it doesn't feel like that. It just feels real, and that is some real work when you're wadding up a correct era McDonald's wrapper to put in the background of a scene, thinking my job can't possibly matter. It does. It makes a difference at home, and
Yeah.
I just love that stuff. So I really think the between the costuming choices, the location scouting, and then what Set Deck did um, for basically four different time periods that are narrowly apart. I mean, like piano note dissonant close together. So it's not as easy as saying blanket 80s. You're doing early 80s, late 80s, early 90s, like you've got close together eras. I think it's a hell of a trick.
Yeah. I am so amazed at how you were able to deep dive without giving everything away. I mean, this is just so wonderful. I hope that this inspires some people who are new to the show to go watch some of these episodes, because there's a lot of really cool entry
Yeah,
points to it. A lot of
and I
things to
I
get
don't want to give
excited about.
away I don't want to give away one of the big spoilers or anything, but it for all the joy I've talked about in the show and how fun and kind of the nerdiness of like, oh, that period is correct and this technology and blah. I bawled like a baby at the end of this show. I mean, it. My wife walked in the room, was like, "What are you watching?" I was like, "You have to leave the room if you ever intend on watching the show. Walk away." Like, uh, it gets its hooks in you, and you really care about where these people are going, and I know, like your real friends, you find yourself wanting stuff to work out for them, even if it means them not being part of the show or something. Like if you have a friend get a really great job opportunity, it's going to require them moving to another city.
Mhm.
Obviously, we're adults. I am thrilled for you take that job. Right. Also, it's sad. You're not going to talk to them the same way. If you get to the point in your life where you're all having kids, all these things happen and they take you further away. And just like real life, I found myself watching the show going, uh, I love all these characters, and if somehow the finale was all of them getting their dream jobs in a way that means we can't have any more show, I'd be like, well, but that's what I wanted for them. You know?
I heard this show recently described, well, it wasn't recent. I recently found somewhere where it was described as a hangout show. And it's an interesting way to look at it because it can get very technical. And I'm not somebody with tech knowledge or, with deep tech knowledge.
Hmm.
So, but it is like, even in the moments where they're talking about the advancements, I feel like I'm with these people and want to spend more time with them, like you were
Yeah,
just saying. So it is this really interesting magic trick that the show executed.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Watching Donna fix a speak and spell, things like that are just you're like, man, I just want to hang out. Oh man, there's I think at one point, Gordon and Cam get a Nintendo,
Hmm.
and they're like, so we're beating this weekend, right? And you're like, yes, and like, oh my god, that's amazing. That's like
If you
we've
ever played
all
Super Mario Brothers,
right,
get
like
ready for nostalgia.
we've all done it. Yeah, Ready Player One's got nothing on this for me in terms of nostalgia. I just watching this show was just like, oh. Also, I do not feel as good about technology in 2024. I'm not as excited about moving critical systems over to half-tested platforms and just watching things be buggy. It's no longer as romantic to me as it was when I was a kid and was like, whatever you're doing on that legal pad, let's just do it slower on the computer. It's cooler. Like, and that's so like watching this show gives me back that feeling of like, oh God, I remember when I was super excited about this. Yes.
Yeah.
Uh, Before I
Uh,
watched it,
oh,
frustrated the
it's
crap
so
out of me.
good. Well, what are you up to now? Where can we find you? Tell us about your
Sure.
podcast and anything else that's coming our way.
Me and my co-host Nick Tice do the TV Dudes. So you can go to thetvdudes.com or patreon.com/tvdudes, and we do a weekly recap of what we're watching, and then we usually pick a new show each week that's hot and out now. And then on Patreon, we often do movie reviews, hit up the theater, and see stuff that's actually back in. I believe they're called movie theaters. They were big. Um, and At the same time, I've got a couple of scripts that I'm trying to query around and get some interest in those. So hopefully, I can bring a couple of action horror creature features to the screen.
Ooh, just my genre. I like it.
I've got a movie called Death Hog that I deeply want to get made. It's
Okay.
about a giant weaponized feral hog. It's the craziest. I love it.
Wow. I'm going to be on the lookout for this. But thank you so much for taking
Yeah,
some time and talking about this show, and hang out for just a second when we're done. But for to all of you who are watching this, please go out there and watch Halt and Catch Fire.
yes, yes.
Bye, everybody.